Joining today. Looks like we've got a really good group from diverse backgrounds and companies from literally all over the world. So we're really pleased you could make the time to join us today. I'm co-founder and CEO of Lucid Link. My name is Peter Thompson. And I've got Johan Hutenga with me, who is a senior solution architect. Johan?
Nice to meet you guys, and thank you so much for joining today.
Great. I assume everybody can see my screen. Johan, are you able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Great. So what we wanted to do today is we're going to introduce to you Lucid Link file spaces. We're going to show how we are different from other solutions in this space that are kind of addressing similar types of problems that everybody is going through. Discuss a couple of the more popular use cases that we see being implemented by customers in the field. And then we'll leave adequate time, quite a bit of time actually. One of the main points of today's webinar is to show you a live demo of the product in action. So with that, I think I'll just dive right in. If anyone has any questions, we do have people monitoring to make sure that we catch those. And after we get done with the entire webinar, we'll stick around and we'll continue to answer questions for as long as you have them. Or if you'd like, you can schedule something live with one of us, one of our sales, or one of our other solution architects to take it offline and have a direct discussion. So as I mentioned, we're Lucid Link. For the past about 4 years, what we've been doing is addressing the challenge of how to mitigate latency when you're accessing files over distance. We have a streaming file service. This allows users to access files directly where they are stored in place, even if over distance, out of a cloud storage. And then we stream them on demand, and as opposed to synchronizing entire data sets or downloading entire files. Now, we provide this capability as a service. We deliver it as software, and we allow customers to bring their own storage, and whether that is on-prem storage or whether that is cloud storage, public cloud storage. We built this technology on top of object storage. So the second thing we do, besides allowing you to access files remotely and get the user experience as if they're local, we also allow you to leverage the benefits and the economics of cloud storage as if it's on-prem, and being able to use it in production types of applications, as opposed to either having to refactor all of your applications to be able to use it, or more likely, and the way we see it being deployed most often today, as long-term retention types of storage or backup, archive, those kind of applications. So before we even formed the company, we began talking to a lot of customers. We've noticed some very, very clear trends. I'm sure these are trends that you are also facing with your customers or hearing about every day. And this is part of the reason that kind of guided us to create the service as we have. The first of which is just the pure sheer amount of data growth, especially unstructured data growth, and how much of that is beginning to move into object storage, whether that is actual implementation object storage or people taking a look at how to do it. For all the right reasons, it's a great place to store a lot of data. It's highly durable, cost effective, it's elastic, so it scales on demand and is easy to manage, but it has a rap for not having high performance. And especially when you're accessing it out of a cloud in a data center or in a public cloud, and you're not right there, that even exacerbates the problem worse. So you can easily do puts and gets and move things into it, but you can't use it as production because of the performance and because there's no file system associated with object storage. You leverage puts and gets and move things in and out. Secondly is just the rapid adoption of cloud services. We now have more options than ever before of where to run applications. We can spin up new apps and point them in different directions. We can run them on GPU-enabled virtual servers for specific workloads, and move that part around. So those options have led the workflows to begin to get spread out. Not only are the workflows being spread out, but increasingly we're seeing distributed workforces as well, with people collaborating on projects with the same set of data through different multiple branch offices, or making use of freelancers or contractors and things like that. So more than ever before, we need to be able to access storage when and where we need it, rapidly and, most importantly, securely. And this is where Lucid Link File Spaces comes into play. So our product allows you to create a shared global namespace that is then accessible from anywhere with an internet connection. You can you install the Lucid Link client, and that will run on virtually anything, whether that is a server, a workstation, a desktop, a laptop, in a virtual machine, in a container. And we support all the major operating systems, including Linux, Windows, and Mac. And gives you a file-based view of the data that's stored in your object storage. Now, this is different from, this is not just a logical view. This is actually, we are distributing the file and then streaming it on demand. So the file remains, the golden copy, remains in the object storage. We present the file through the Lucid Link app as if it is local. From the application's perspective, for all intents and purposes, it is local. It behaves as if it's just a local file system. And then we stream the bits of the file on demand as it's being required, and give the user the performance and the experience as if that file is local. You'll notice on this diagram that there is a lack of additional infrastructure. There are no special gateways or caching devices or complex networking to set up. Just using the internet and Lucid Link client application, you're able to access that. So that makes it really easy to deploy, very efficient, very cost effective. As we mentioned before, customers can bring their own object storage, whether that is on-prem, the likes of Scality or Cloudian or Zadar, or pretty much any major manufacturer out there that's got S3 compliant storage, or whether that is cloud-based storage. And again, all the major players, AWS, Wasabi, Google Storage, IBM, and a number of others that we have listed on our website. And every day we are working with companies and qualifying more and more different options as the back end. Now, finally, we've taken a really strong approach to security. We implemented a full system-wide end-to-end encryption scheme where only the customer has the key, and everything is encrypted from the client side at the point that the write is committed throughout the entire life of the data. So neither the object storage provider, nor Lucid Link, nor anyone else can peek in and see the data. Both the metadata and the data are encrypted. Now, just quickly to highlight how this is different from other schemes out there, we see that for the most part, there are a number of companies who are trying to address the similar problems. And we can break those down into two basic categories. The first one being synchronization, where you've got your cloud storage and then you're synchronizing all of the data on every client that may need access to that, to those files or to the files that you're sharing. So you've got replicas on all of the client devices and synchronizing everything back to the centralized copy. The second one is sort of similar, except that it has a gateway, and they do this to mitigate additional performance, where they'll keep all the file replicas in a cached, essentially a storage server that may be on your local LAN, and then people can access that through the LAN. When some of these, the problem with that is through scale. Once you have a number of branch offices and you get into high numbers, not only do you have to implement the infrastructure at every single one of them, which becomes expensive, but then keeping full replicas in sync around all of those offices, or each place where you have one of these gateways, becomes pretty load intensive and begins to break down in terms of performance. So Lucid Link is different. We keep the single source of truth in the cloud. We do replicate and synchronize the metadata to the device and provide as a file system as if all of the data is on the client device, but then we just stream the bits as they're being requested by the application. And as mentioned before, we can really attain pretty high levels of performance, things that you never would be able to normally run on object storage directly out of that. So giving yourself the benefit of the backend object storage, but the performance as if it's local NAS. One of the first and most popular use cases that we started to see customers deploying was simply using it as a backup target. So instead of, more and more of the backup companies have object storage connectors. And by and large, what this entails is backing up to local disk and then taking that backup copy and replicating it through some kind of a gateway or connector into the cloud object storage. With Lucid Link, we can provide a data mount point that again looks and behaves just like it's a local storage mount point directly out of the object storage, and you can configure that as your backup target and directly back up to the cloud. Now, once it's there, getting it there and being that sort of connector piece is only one part of the story, because remember, this is a shared global namespace that's accessible from anywhere. So for the purposes of recovery, for example, in a disaster, you may have a cloud server configured or a server in another data center configured, mount that image that you backed up into the object storage, and then you can literally boot that and we can stream it on demand. Of course, depending on how far it is, there are some limitations to that, and it's not something we recommend doing. But in a disaster, this is really a compelling way to be able to recover very quickly. And in fact, we have a use case where one of our customers had to do that, ended up running a crucial part of their factory monitoring systems directly off an image housed in public object storage. And they did that for about a week, I believe.
Yeah, about a week. It was, I think, 5 days. They should have migrated sooner, but it was a water district, and it was quite critical that the stuff stayed running. So it was a very cool use case.
Now, once the customers realize what we have provided them is a data mount point that it looks and behaves as well performing general storage, they quickly move beyond backup and they start taking a look at typical workloads that they would normally run on a NAS, and they begin saying, okay, if I look at this NAS, it's beginning to age out. I'm going to have to spend a lot of money on maintenance or replacement or scaling it out or something. And maybe about 80% of those workloads don't really need that performance profile of being on that NAS, and would love to put those in the cloud, something that's elastic, grows on demand, and is economically much more attractive. The reason they don't do that, quite frankly, is performance. You just cannot use puts and gets with a gateway type of device and run production applications or workloads on that. But with Lucid Link, you can, and so therefore they start identifying different applications where they can do that. Not only are the applications, but there are a number of applications that may not already be cloud ready. Maybe the manufacturer has yet to release an S3 connector. But with Lucid Link, of course, they don't require that. It just looks and behaves as a local mount point that they can configure and begin using it as storage. So we're beginning to see all the different opportunities and potential applications that can be run on that. We're going to explore a couple of those as we move forward. I noticed that we do have a lot of service providers on today's call, and frankly, that is probably our largest, our fastest growing segment. You may have seen that we recently announced an MSP program, and it really is, what we're hearing from them is that it brings some key benefits for them, including just improving the velocity of their sales without having to position upfront infrastructure costs or putting people out for doing implementation. Being able to do this from a software perspective, from a management console, is pretty compelling. Of course, once customers begin putting getting storage on the platform, there's a great retention in that. And they not only are they very satisfied and want to keep doing it and finding additional use cases, but it's a great way to keep working with these customers over a longer period of time. And finally, of course, it's because it's sold as SaaS. This is a great source to begin building a recurring revenue business out of it. I'm going to quickly go through just a couple of use cases and then turn it over to Johan for the demo. We already mentioned we are seeing a number of MSPs implementing us. Here's one out of Europe who uses their own storage, Cloudian-based storage, that they were, their customers were looking for file services. And this is a way for them to just provide a software-based data mount point back to their own data center on top of their object storage, and allow them to do things like backing up or collaboration, putting file servers in the cloud, things like that. Here's a second one. This one is actually located in South Africa, and they were very interested in using public cloud for some of their customers, but frankly, they were too far away from it. They didn't have any local data centers that they could easily use. However, since Lucid Link is in the business of mitigating the effects of the latency and distance created by distance, and through our distributing and streaming the files on demand, they were actually able to use this data mount points as general storage for things like backup. And this is with a data center that is about 8,000 miles away. And as we mentioned, since this works really quite well for applications that may not already be cloudified. Here's a school district who uses Milestone, a surveillance or security video platform that doesn't have native capability to work with object storage, and they can just provide directly out of public object storage. They're providing a Lucid Link mount point and writing directly to it. Not only does this allow them to greatly simplify the process of getting the data in there and configuring it, but once it's up there, should they have to go and review some of the footage, it's as easy as browsing a directory structure and being able to stream the video back on demand. So for having to have rapid retrieval of the video that's in there, this is a great way to go about that. And then here's another one where we've got a number of 19 different branch offices where they wanted to consolidate their shared storage into the cloud, take it off prem, not have to deal with expanding it, providing secure access to it, managing users locally, all those kinds of things. They put it in the cloud. Everyone got their direct access to it. They did this in a way that was completely transparent to the users. In fact, the new request that the IT manager began receiving was, hey, when can you transition my group to that new fast server that everyone's using? So they actually had no idea that they were going to the cloud for this. They were getting the performance as if it were on-prem. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Johan, I wanted to leave you enough time to go ahead and
Perfect.
fire up your demo and take it from here.
That sounds great. So as Peter already highlighted, and there's lots of different things you can do with Lucid Link. I just want to very quickly cover. I hope you guys can see my screen. Let's see if it worked.
Yep, we can see it
Perfect.
perfectly.
Fantastic. So effectively, the demo I'm going to do today is a very simple one to start with, and we're going to do something where we effectively create a little file space. A file space can scale out quite massively because it's based on object storage, so it is completely scale out. And we're going to connect to this file space from different operating systems and use some of the collaboration features effectively. After which we'll talk about a more specific use case around performance and just show you how well this performs. The way that this works is the metadata and the data layer are split, which means that the object store is where the data is stored, and the Lucid Link client has a copy of the metadata, which can then be distributed amongst all the other clients where the Lucid Link service. Everything we do is a SaaS offering, which is why it appeals so well to MSPs. And effectively that is coordinated by that service, which runs in a container or multiple containers, depending on how you've configured that. So that's effectively a cloud native file system. If you want to get started, what I'm doing today is pretty much something you can follow along with. So you can click on Get Started here. Of course, if you're an MSP and you want to talk to the guys about partnership, you can go here as well. When you hit Get Started, you'll end up being asked for a very simple registration. And then after that, you'll end up in here. I already created a file space earlier. But what you'll do is you'll create a file space. If you have an object storage vendor you prefer, you can pick bring your own storage, or you can use Lucid Link storage. And you can tell there's a little bit of a pricing difference, of course, because if you include the object storage, it's a little bit more expensive. I can call this effectively, this is a demo file space, right? I can call this demo. I can then pick a object storage provider of my choice, at which point then we can create a file space. That is a global namespace that can be accessed from anywhere. So I can click on AWS or Google or Amazon. You can see all the logos there. We actually go through quite a bit of effort to validate our compatibility with those logos. So what happens is that we actually check if the performance of these different providers is up to the level that we need. We actually parallelize access, which is also, if you remember the use case section, Peter was talking about how Cypherwave in South Africa is able to use object storage from somewhere in Europe, about 8,000 miles away. We make it possible to do a lot of things over distance that aren't possible today. Now, we don't break the rules of physics. We do also do some other things, and we sometimes just simply transfer less data because everything that we do is done on a block level, which means that one object may turn into multiple blocks. I can also select other cloud. When I do that, I can pick any other object storage provider that is S3 compliant. And if you noticed, Azure isn't on this list right now, but that is coming pretty soon. So if I go here and hit AWS and then pick Northern California, because that's where I live, I can then select I provide my own bucket name, or I can just hit next. Then what will happen is that I can create the file space. And at the same time now, a little container is spun up with that metadata coordination service. It's pretty much the only thing you have to worry about doing on the web portal side. Everything that I did today and I'm doing will be done with interfaces and effectively UI, which looks really pretty, but it looks so deceptively simple. People wonder, where is the power in it, right? So there are some things you can do from an API perspective. You can actually, everything that I'm doing can be done with APIs or command line as well. So especially if you're a large service provider, you're not going to provision file spaces manually like this. You're going to work through the process where everything is automated and integrated with your own portal. I'll hit initialize now, and then if I do that, I can actually launch this little Lucid Link client. And what you'll see is that it'll ask me for my access key and secret key. Once I do that, and I'm just going to enter a fake key, you'll see that it asks for a root password. This password, when you specify this, encrypts your entire file space. It actually encrypts a key that is used to encrypt the file space. It's very much like an iPhone. You can change your iPhone password, but if you lose it, you can't get back in. Very much so that you can actually set it up in such a way that you can have multiple different people set up to access this on an encryption level that is different. So I'll show you how that works in a minute. Just don't forget that password, because if you do, there's very little we can do to help you, because the data is encrypted on the client, in transit, and in the cloud. All right, so as I keep going, I'm going to log into a file space I created before, like any good cooking show. Why would I, I think I'm going to skip a step or two and wait for the stuff to bake, right, and have the data come in. I also noticed that the signal is getting a little bit worse on my machine. I hope you guys can still hear me okay. And I'm just going to log in with my root user and the password that I specified a few minutes ago. And I'll hit connect. And you'll see that now I'm actually connected to the file space on this machine. And under here, I'm going to create a document that I'll access with a few other machines. So what will happen is that as I go through this, we actually will collaborate on this document a little bit. So I'm going to manage my user accounts. I can create as many users and shares as I want to. You'll notice this is a little bit different than just Windows or Mac user support. This is simple looking, but it's actually very powerful. I can give a user access to specific shares, and those shares effectively are folders, and those folders have keys. And underneath that, there's objects, and those objects are associated with those folder keys, which means you have a nested encryption model that user password, when they log in, is only able to decrypt the bits of data that user explicitly has access to. Our first customer was a government 3-letter agency, and these are the kind of features that they really like, because from a security perspective, this allows you to do things where the user only has access to their data, and you can have it set up in such a way that you're compliant with laws around specific data locality and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm going to minimize that now, but I'm going to create a simple shared document. So effectively, I will create some document, and I will put something in this document. And this is from Windows. And then I will save this, and I'll create a snapshot. Now, snapshots actually are automated, and there's a scheduler that you can just simply trigger, which could happen to be configured to run grandfather, father, son. Just for the sake of the demo and to make sure I follow along exactly with where I'm going, I'm creating the snapshots manually today. I'll show you how to restore from them in a minute. So I'm going to log into a Mac, and I'm going to connect to the same file space. And we'll use user 1 this time, and I'll log in. And you'll see there's a slight difference because user 1 doesn't have exactly the same access. You'll see here that we use Fuse instead of our own filter driver. And you'll see here that there's the exact same setup. And I can talk to the same file space and put something else in this document. And this is from Mac OS. And we'll just hit save. And we'll create a snapshot. And we'll go to Linux. And of course, if you have questions as I go through this, feel free to ask them via the question panel, and I'll get through to that in a moment. You'll see now that I'm doing the exact same thing on Mac and then Linux now, sorry. And over here, you'll see that it shows up slightly differently. User 2 has a folder here, and there's a shared folder. And then we have this document again. And this was something that I probably did the other day, so I'll close that away. Oh my goodness, how many questions are you going to ask me to restore old data? Anyways, LibreOffice, there we go. Put something else in this document. And here we go. Now I can save that. So this is a very simple example of how incredibly seamless this is, right? You can access the same data from all over the planet and work together. We actually have global locking support as well. And there's a bunch of other features coming in the future to help with that. But let me create one last snapshot. And let me go back. So let's go back to the first snapshot we created today. You'll see that I have much more than just 2 or 3. I also have snapshots created by that scheduler. So we'll just wait for this to show up here in a moment. And you'll see that I have a bunch of hourly, weeklies, monthlies, and yearlies, because there's grandfather, father, son retention. But I also have that specific point in time, and this is a journaling file system, so the snapshot is simply a marker to a point in time. Technically, you could slide in between, but we just use snapshot to mark that as a specific point. So there we go. That's a very basic demo. Now, just to show you that it isn't that simple, right? There's a lot more power to it. What happens in backup, and Peter was talking about this earlier, backup seems to be kind of a gateway for using us. NAS is one of those things that has a lot of kind of data heavy things on it. A lot of cloud related projects have big problems when it comes to how do I adopt a new file server solution in the cloud? How do I migrate data to it? How do I work together across different clouds and different locations and remote branch offices when NAS is effectively and file data are really heavy to move? So this is one of those things where backup is kind of a problem. because you have to store the data locally to wait for the backup to complete. Then you have to submit it to a cloud gateway, or it depends on the solution. And then eventually it ends up in object storage. There's lots of ways to make that more efficient, but most backup products, just like when they write to tape, they think that they need to write to local disk first before they write to object storage. So to solve that problem, a lot of MSPs are using things like Lucid Link, because Lucid Link will effectively give you a local mount point, which points directly to object storage, giving you that local read-write performance, which is kind of the crazy part, because how do we do that, right? There's some magic to it. And then the restore of that can be done very instantaneously as well. So this is kind of a gateway, but once you think about the fact that we can give you random access to object storage, you can think about all the other use cases that are possible. We talked about standard cloud file NAS and collaboration and locking. You can also do things like video storage and archive and surveillance. There are medical use cases for medical imaging and DICOM. There are many other use cases. I can't list them all, but I'm going to just very quickly show you what happens when you have a backup or when you have a VM image in the cloud. We've actually done this with about 100 VMs at the same time. And this isn't necessarily something you would do every day, right? As Peter mentioned, I'm not going to replace a SAN with Lucid Link, right? There is still a reason to have a local SSD, NVMe, some kind of centralized storage solution for your VMware and Hyper-V and your containers and your whatever, infrastructure solutions you're using. But this is great for a backup, and this is great for a restore in that situation. So very much like that customer that had to run from the cloud just recently because they had a disaster, you can then run this VM even though it's not actually locally here. I cleared my cache earlier, so what we'll see, but I'll just do it again just for fun. I'll show you what happens. I can actually, everything we do, I can run via the command line as well. And that's more important if you're doing things like automation. So my cache is now clear. And let's open this up. Just to explain one more thing, we just switched RDP sessions. So now I am talking to a server in Germany. This is a bare metal server running Hyper-V effectively. This is a Windows VM sitting on EU Central 1, which is 143 kilometers away. So normally you can't boot a VM that far away, and you certainly can't boot a VM that easily off the internet. So I'm going to hit start, and we'll see it go. So over here now, you'll see that the data throughput goes up, and we're going to be receiving more data packets. And while that happens, the VM will boot. And I think I selected the wrong interface. See, there you go. We'll just wait for that VM to start. And that's it. When I saw this the first time, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to work for Lucid Link. You guys have done some crazy things here, right? And so when you think about this, the development team and the background of this company is quite interesting. So our CTO used to work for Datacore, and he actually wrote some of the bits for Sound Symphony. And so this effectively Lucid Link, if you think about it, is much more than a tool built for object storage. It's actually, if you will, kind of a storage controller for object storage. And here you go, the VM's starting. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so, and we'll log into it. While I, do that, I'm wondering if there's some more questions. So I'm going to switch panes, but, let me know if there's anything we can help answer. And while that happens, of course, we can talk a little bit more about use cases and next steps for those of you on the call. I guess one popular question that comes up is, will Lucid Link support product X, for backup, for example? The answer is usually yes, because of how simple it is to manage and how easy it is to make that a drive letter. As you see here, it's just drive letter L right here. And that's kind of a very easy kind of way to go about it. A lot of people, when they ask that kind of question, go, okay, so as a service provider, does that mean I can rebrand it? How do I show this to customers in a way that makes sense? So you can actually just do this as a drive letter on a system, but also you can change the icons and stuff like that on here as well if you really want to. Most service providers don't worry about that because they can hide enough of the UI that it just becomes a drive letter. The customer knows no different. As that previous use case highlighted, there's actually a customer of ours that is using us for about 19 different robo sites where the customers don't know they're using Lucid Link at all. The question is, can I just be on that faster file server? That file server is much faster than the one I was previously using, right?
Well, and one of the other really use cases that we're seeing, all day long, actually. I mean, we see people downloading, creating a new file space and trying it out, and that's in the media and entertainment space. That's one industry that particularly uses a lot of contractors and tends to have a lot of distributed work going on these projects.
Right.
So the ability to use local tools on your workstation, but have the data assets living in a public cloud, both for being able to just scale that out and use it and have it protected, but also for collaborating on that, giving access to that to other contractors or freelancers, people with specialty items,
Yeah,
specialty skills.
exactly. Yeah. So obviously the VM use case is a simple one, and it's kind of highlights, it highlights the ability to perform really well. But the value is really in bringing the data back close to the people, where the gravity is, as you mentioned. The cost of being able to hire somebody on the other side of the planet, that could be much lower, and that person could be much more talented than the local employee market that I have access to where I am.
So Johan, we just had a question come in asking about the potential cost savings when using Lucid Link in conjunction with something like Veeam.
That's a great question. So if we think about the backup use case, just to bring that back up, right, something like Veeam will end up using a lot more resources and a lot more infrastructure. One of the things that the customer that we showed earlier, CipherWave, really liked about this use case, and they use it for Veeam partially as well, is that for starters, they had problems with keeping up with the customer disk. Effectively, customs and other things in South Africa make it really hard to import hardware on time, and there's just things that go wrong there. And so it's much easier to provision storage on demand. So the on-demand portion is easier, the maintenance is easier, but also the overall cost. I think that numbers have shown, at least with some of the MSPs that we work with, kind of off the cuff, it's about 50 to 60% savings over what they do today without using Lucid Link.
That's right. That's exactly it. And they cite a combination of not having to provision local hardware. They add some deployment cost in that, as well as licensing costs, because you don't have to go out and get something specifically that has access to S3 connectors and things like that.
Right. Yeah, there's some extra cost with those cloud gateways and those features relating to scale out as well. I hope that answers the question. It seems like it's a pretty compelling reason for people to switch, from what we are seeing anyways.
Well, we've gone a little bit over the time here, but we had a couple of good questions. If there are any other questions, thank you very much, and we'll stick around and be happy to address those. But if you have something else to get to on your busy days, feel free to jump off anytime you'd like. We have recorded this session and we'll be sending it out to you, and would love to have a follow-up conversation at your leisure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.